when you're going through something like trauma, the terminology and the words and the way that you discuss it isn't always obvious. And it's certainly not always helpful.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. My guest this episode, Jenna Edwards, is an actor, activist, and author. Jenna and I discuss her newly released book, Aggressive Optimism, which is a fictional account of a young woman coping with mental health challenges following a traumatic event. Jenna openly acknowledges that the work parallels her own story, which might be why the protagonist's thoughts, insecurities, struggles, and successes seem so real, and why I recommend the book for young readers who are facing their own challenges. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
About 20 years, what year is it now?
Yeah, 2024.
About 21 years ago, I was buying oranges in the farmer's market in Santa Monica, California, and an elderly man drove through 4 blocks of people, and he killed 10 of them and injured over 60 of us, and the man standing right next to me didn't make it. And my, I always say, like, my brain broke in that moment. You know, I didn't get a head injury, thank goodness, but I did suffer severe debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder. And I ended up, like, my journey went from, you know, being an actress on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and thinking my whole life was going to be what I had dreamed of it being from the time I was like 3 years old. And to not being able to speak, not being able to read, not being able to stop crying, forgetting basic words, not sleeping. I didn't sleep for 8 months, and I ended up in the psych ward. And I learned so many tips and tricks and just really different paths of healing the trauma. And I am happy to say I am trauma-free. I mean, it flares up every once in a while, but that's a whole other conversation. But I have a toolbox full of things that I can pull from, you know, to help me if it does flare up again. And so as I've been going through this journey, you know, a lot of people have been encouraging like a nonfiction book and all of that kind of stuff. But to be totally honest, I'm a huge believer that there are 3 sides to every story. And I also just don't feel like I remember things accurately. I mean, I had severe trauma, like I couldn't remember words. So who knows if I'm, you know, remembering the exact moments and the exact details. And so a nonfiction really didn't sit well with me. But the thing I do remember is the emotions and, like I said, the techniques and the healing pieces. And so I decided to make it into a novel. And so that's where Aggressive Optimism, the novel, came from.
You answered so many, that question that I had, because knowing a little bit about your biography and then reading the book, you know, I was like, well, this is really parallel. So you just explained to me why you decided to not make it nonfiction. But I had been developing a hypothesis that one of the reasons you went with it being fiction is because the character in the book tries so many things, right, on the path to ultimately overcoming their PTSD or to gaining control, taking control away from the trauma, right?
I love that.
Right.
Yes. choosing to figure it out.
Right.
Which is the essence of what I believe aggressive optimism is. It's like this mindset concept of acknowledging, because denial almost killed me for real. And then figuring out, like having this like aggressive, optimistic belief that you can find your way to healing, to living the life that you dreamed of. You know, it's not going to look the same, but when does it ever? You know what I mean? And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, I love that you gleaned that from the book. That makes me very happy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that aggressive optimism. I mean, it comes into the book, if I'm not mistaken, because the main character in your book is Nif, if I'm saying that correctly.
You are.
And Nif's friend Zane has an amazing grandmother, it seems like. This is a character I want to spend a lot more time with. And this grandmother's character, she's the one that talks about, or she introduces the main character to this aggressive optimism. How is it defined in the book?
Essentially the same way I just defined it, which is, you know, acknowledging what's going on in front of you, making a choice as to whether or not you're okay with it. I think that we oftentimes don't allow ourselves to be okay with things that are going on in our lives. And if it's something you're not okay with, figuring out how to get around it, through it, over it, whatever the term that you want to use, whatever the situation calls for, and just moving forward. And so it's a strong belief in your ability to figure it out.
Right.
You know, that life can get better if that's what you choose for it to be.
And there's a part, because the first time that it gets introduced was actually not in the context of the trauma, right? It's talking about the main character's goals for her life. And this aggressive optimism, if I'm not mistaken, it was about the fact that the bigger or the more important the goal, the more aggressive your optimism has to be, right? The more optimism you have to put behind it. So the more outlandish or the bigger the dream, it, almost requires a greater optimism. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. I think I always attribute it to the trauma because that is the meat of the book. But I wrote it for high school students specifically because I was speaking before the pandemic to them about aggressive optimism. And it was like I fell in love with that age group because they're so active in their learning and their desire to grow and figure out life. And so the concept is actually introduced because Nif has this huge dream, similar to me. I came to LA to be an actor. She really wants to move to Los Angeles to be a famous singer. And it's right after this concert, and she does this great job. And her bully or frenemy, if you will, basically cuts her off at the knees. And I feel like that's just something that happens all of the time. And so I wanted it to be a much more relatable introduction because it really is a daily practice, in my opinion. You're gonna, life's gonna kick you in the teeth, whether that's, slamming you with a car or having this person around you who just consistently has to put you down, which, by the way, the character in the book, her name is Jessa. She's actually based on many people. Right. And I just want to make that clear. But mostly, honestly, I would say a good portion of her is based on my internal thoughts. And I think a lot of people have those mean kid thoughts. We believe what we're told so deeply that we're speaking to ourselves in that just really horrible way. And so that's where Jessa came from. And that's why I wanted to introduce the concept in a more daily, right? If you have a dream, you have to believe that you can make it happen, or it's not going to. Like, things aren't going to fall in your lap. It just is not the way the world works.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you captured kind of that singularity of focus that the adolescent brain sometimes has. Adolescents have to be self-centered. It's kind of what they need to do at that time in their development. And so they do get very, very kind of myopic. They're the only ones that have experienced something. They're the only ones that have gone through it. Every song is written for them or about them. But I want to take a step back, knowing a little bit about your own history that you've generously shared before in other interviews. The trauma of that event at the Santa Monica Farmers Market, first of all, how did you recognize that what you were experiencing was trauma?
Yeah. Honestly, so the Saturday, so the farmers market happens on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And this happened on the Wednesday farmers market. And then Saturday they set up like special farmers market with a memorial. And it was fantastic for me because I got to like meet the rescue workers that helped me get to the ambulance. It was a whole thing. And I remember like on the sidewalk, they had set up chairs with all of these therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and people that were volunteering their time graciously to talk to those of us who had experienced what we had experienced. And I was sitting there looking at this woman, and I'll never forget it. She's like, "You have post-traumatic stress disorder." And my immediate words were, "No, I don't. I'm not a soldier."
Right.
And it was this, because back when this happened, that diagnosis was not given to people outside the military very often. And so that was a whole other layer of my healing journey, was a lot of denial. I didn't feel like what I went through justified that diagnosis. And so it wasn't until I hadn't slept for 8 months and I ransacked my entire apartment trying to find sleeping pills because I was going to take the whole bottle, not because I wanted to die, but because I wanted to sleep so badly. And it was the only thing my brain could think of to make that happen. And I couldn't find them because my now husband was a genius and hid them, thank goodness. And in that, I had this moment of clarity when I was looking at my like ransacked apartment where I was like, I need help. Maybe I don't feel valid in this diagnosis, but something's wrong. And I do want to say, like, I talk about this sometimes in a very flippant way, but that's only because I so firmly believe that we can heal. That if we commit to going down this journey, we can get to where we want to be. And I feel like the biggest thing for me was acknowledgement in myself, and then externally, like my friends and my family didn't really understand what was going on. I certainly didn't. The therapists were saying things to me that I did not understand. I mean, I was in my 20s at the time, so I was still kind of a kid too. Right. And so when I wrote this book, it was really important to me to like make it relatable so that the kids that read it who are going through things have terminology, have a character that they can go to that's like, oh, remember when Nif was going through this in the hospital? Like, she said XYZ and it really helped. Like, there's one part in the book where, and this was so helpful for me and why I wanted to share it, was after I got out of the hospital, after Nif gets out of the hospital, she is having a really bad day. And she talks to her parents and she's just like, Zane and Karsten, who are her two best friends, are coming over. I'm okay, but I need to talk to them because this isn't something that I feel like is going to be helpful if I talk to you. And the reason and obviously I lay it out a little bit easier to understand, but the reason that I wanted that scene, and there's several of those scenes, is that mental health how do I say it? It's so important that we start to destigmatize it, of course, but also remove the emotion. Like, treat it like a broken bone when we're talking about it. You're not going to be like, oh, how does that broken bone make you feel? No, you're going to be like, my bone hurts. I need to set it. It will heal if I go through therapy, right? And so just being super practical about the type of help that NIF needs in that moment, and then having had the conversation with her parents so that they don't feel slighted. I think that's such an important thing, right? It's like, oftentimes as adults, we've gone through it. We know, right? But like you said earlier, the teenager is the only person who exists on the planet, and that is how it should be. And so making it so that you set up your communication, especially around mental health, in such a way that the teenager feels comfortable enough to be like, I am going through something, I'm okay, but I need to talk to my friends about this, not you. Like, I still love you, you're still the greatest, like that kind of thing. Because I feel like there's a lot of emotion tied up in all parties. And when you're going through something like trauma, the terminology and the words and the way that you discuss it isn't always obvious. And it's certainly not always helpful, right? Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's just a phase. Well, yeah, but it's a painful phase. So that, like, isn't a great term to use, like, kids are feeling what they're feeling. And we need to learn to acknowledge it without taking it personally.
I think that's a really important message, and because I think that I know that we are seeing in many places across the country where we're passing laws that basically say, I don't want anything to happen to my child that might embarrass me or make me look bad. So I don't want you to ask them any questions in any surveys that might reflect poorly on me. I don't care if it means that they're not going to get the help and services that they need. I don't want you to think poorly of me. And so I think that's a really good point. When we think about our kids' mental health, we have to take our own ego out of it and do what's right for them. And
100%.
You do this, by the way. I do want to come back to the book here at just this moment, because I think that you have a really great passage where Nif is mad that a friend she's made when she's hospitalized is that the husband is denying this woman treatment. And Nif sums it up, I think, really well, what you just said about her treatment. Do you recall that what I'm talking about, this scene?
I know the scene. I definitely know the scene. I don't remember
so Nif said,
exactly what I said.
Nif said, if she were suffering from cancer, you would not take her out of here. You would not deny her treatment. This is no different, right? And I think that that's exactly what you're getting at there. I am curious to know, again, because you have shared some of your own personal story, the event at the Santa Monica Farmers Market, what did it teach you about, if anything, about your existing trauma sensitivity that you had coming into that event, given your early childhood adversity?
Wow, that's such a powerful, profound question, because, of course, when it all happened, I was like, I'm one of the toughest people I know. Why is this happening? Because I did go through a lot of adversity, and I considered myself extremely strong. Just for everybody listening, if you don't know my story, like Brad's saying, I talk a lot about it. So please feel free to Google or go to jennaedwards.com. There's a lot of interviews on there. But in a nutshell, my mom's second husband was very abusive. And my mom is so strong and amazing, and we left, thank goodness, and she married my current dad. And there, like, I got to see the juxtaposition between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship, and I really wanted that to be in the book as well, and I think it is. But I think because I was just a very pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I grew up in Minnesota. We don't talk about this stuff, like being able to get through the day without having any kind of like breakdown was a sign of strength, right? But then when the crash happened and PTSD happened, which is just a chemical imbalance, the way that it was described to me that like lit the light bulb was my adrenaline pumped. I did not run. I did not flight. Therefore, it sat there and it messed with my body chemistry. And it's just like a broken bone, like cancer. That's just how it was, right? But it was the first time in my life that I cried. And like the way that I cried, it's hard to describe in brief conversation, but you'll see it in the book. But to get back to your question, it was like I was so blocked off that it was almost like hitting a brick wall with just enough force that it broke everything, right? And so I would say on the outside, I was not at all trauma averse, but on the inside, it was the dam breaking. And unfortunately, it took like a massive tragedy to make that happen. And I say that part because just even recently, I was living in this apartment and they were doing construction outside, and I was so like on edge. And I realized like PTSD is almost like a nervous system injury, like an old football injury when your knee gets like achy because it's cold. I've noticed like if it's too loud at times, I'll get hyper stimulated and like symptoms will start again. But again, I have my toolbox, and I share a lot of tools, I hope, through story in the book. And my dream would be for like all the teenagers, all the parents to read it so that they can understand how to talk about these types of things, like we don't know if we're trauma averse. We don't know. Right. And so anyway, I'm babbling.
No. And so I longtime listeners of the Talking About Kids podcast, which should be everyone. No.
Yes.
Will
Agree.
be familiar with adverse childhood experiences, and they'll also be they'll be familiar with the idea that there are 3 E's to trauma. It's not just the event. And I think that your story, but also what Nif is experiencing in the book, is this idea of, well, I wasn't that hurt in the event. I wasn't.
Yeah.
And there are too many people today that will say, well, why is this kid acting this way? The same thing happened to the other kids, and they aren't. So me. Exactly. So we need to remind everybody that there's 3 E's. It's not just the event, but how it's experienced. And we all experience events differently. The 3rd E, of course, being the effect that it has. So 2 people could have the same event, maybe even experience it in a relatively similar way, but it'll affect them differently. So we can't judge
100%.
trauma just by the event. There is a much larger context of the individual. So you talk about your tool belt, and we're big into that here. There's two different kinds of tools that I notice that are successful for Nif, especially as she's beginning this journey. One is understanding how the trauma is living in her body, and I'm thinking about maybe the acupuncture scene. But then, so let's talk about what you do with the body. We know that it's the body that's keeping score of these events, to borrow the Van der Kolk phrase. So what did you learn about how your body was holding on to this trauma and what you needed to do about that?
You know, it's so fascinating. First of all, I do want to say, like, any time you're trying to heal from trauma or accomplish a goal, even, or whatever you're setting out to do in your life, there's a million ways to do it. And you just have to commit and be aggressively optimistic about finding your way, right? So for me, acupuncture was the beginning of that physical journey. And it was so unbelievably helpful. And I think there were so many factors to why it was so helpful. First of all, the physical, like, I can't explain it. I'm not a doctor, but I tell you what, the first time I went into that acupuncturist's office and he like put the needles in, which by the way doesn't hurt. Just so you know, it's not voodoo. It's just really freaking cool. He put this one needle in. He was like, this one's for emotion. And I was so numb. I remember sitting on that table. I was so numb to everything. And I basically cried myself out. I can't even explain it. Anyway, he left the room. I was lying down by myself. And all of a sudden, my body just shook and tears, like cleansing tears, just came out. It was such a weird physical reaction because I wasn't thinking anything because I was so tired, right? And so that was the first experience. And then to cap off physical journey, I will say somatic experiencing therapy is probably one of the greatest therapies I've ever gone through. And I didn't even know I needed it. So it was 10 years after. I mean, I had talked myself out. I thought I was completely fine. And I'll never forget it. I was doing this radio show and the radio show host was a doctor and she practiced somatic experiencing therapy. And she looks at me and she goes, do you realize that every time you talk about the crash, your body tilts? And I was like, what? No, I didn't realize this. And so I started working with her. And it turns out that every time I would talk about the crash, my body would just like subconsciously move out of the way, right? Like, I'm not going to get hit by this car. That doesn't exist. And through that, like, so many experiences of just like my body letting go of trauma, past and the most recent. It's incredible. So many different ways to heal. Please explore whatever works for you. I think that worked really well for me because I'm creative and she'd be like, okay, well, what's happening right now? And I was able to like really describe it and see it in my head as like a comic book, which is weird. And so I don't know, it's just somatic experiencing and acupuncture were two extremely amazing physical things. And then the ice trick, which I think I need to make a video of, but I talk about it in the book. I'm going to tease it there. Okay. Y'all need to read the ice trick. Everybody needs to know about it.
Well, I mean, the science of it is on your side, right? Because we know that your body has a physical reaction to the stimuli before you're aware of it or can process it in a conscious way. So your body's inflamed or tensed or the muscles are moving before you even know, whoa, something in my environment is bothering me. So I really like that. But
Absolutely.
The other big piece, especially as Nif is beginning her journey, it goes back to the name of the book, the aggressive optimism, the desire to surround herself with positivity, with positive thoughts and images and people too, right? How important has that been in your journey?
Absolutely. Crucial. Just crucial. And I think for me, if you go anywhere where my name is, you will see yellow. It's just a thing. And I didn't realize it until somebody was like, why do you wear so much yellow? And then I was like, oh, because when I was at my worst with PTSD, and same for NIF, you're at your worst point, I realized I'm very affected by my environment, probably more than anything, right? And so I started to surround myself with yellow because it made me happy. And it grew and expanded. And it's my thing to, like, I have a yellow car, and if I'm having a bad day, I'm like, well, you can't be sad when you're driving around a ball of sunshine. Like, it's just like a visual trigger to be like, you get to choose. And you also sometimes don't get to choose what emotion you're feeling, but you definitely get to choose how you react to that emotion once the initial reaction has passed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So you touched on this briefly, but I think that it is one of the more powerful parts of the ongoing narrative in your book. And I think it's something that I want more people to hear about, not just reading your book, but today in the podcast. Your main character, anytime there is something happening to her, either good or where she is in tremendous stress or need, she's apologizing. Right?
Oh my gosh, that's, yeah.
She feels guilty when great things happen to her, unworthy of them. She feels guilty when she needs help.
Absolutely.
And apologizes for needing help. And in some cases, I'm trying not to give too much of the book away here, Jenna, but in some cases it goes to extreme lengths not to actually ask for the help that she needs because she feels guilty for needing the help when she sees other people that she thinks need it more or that deserve it more 100%. Or something. How do we overcome that?
It's such a heavy topic, and I know we're towards the end here, but I will say my biggest piece of advice is for all of us to understand that what we're feeling is just a brief moment if we allow it to be. And I say that because Nif feels guilty for living. Like she really feels like a burden on the world. Her friends, her family, herself. And then, to have this huge need for help it's too much. I mean, talk about she feels like a burden just because she didn't get to clean the kitchen when she was going to her part-time job, all of that kind of stuff. She's really guilt driven, and that guilt stems from being alive. And so the journey with that perspective is her learning to accept that she has something to contribute, and that contribution isn't ego driven. I think that's the biggest thing, right? She has these huge dreams, and she's growing up in an environment where her parents are living those dreams, and the town is picking on them and ostracizing them for it. And she's being told a lot of times, who do you think you are? Why do you think you're so special? All of this. And she does not think she is special at all. She just has this dream, right? And so I feel like for all of us who are experiencing that, imposter syndrome is a great term for it, or that burden. Number one, I will say, please talk to somebody who can help. Choose who you talk to about being a burden wisely, because if you're talking to your friends, they're probably not going to get it, but professionals will. And so that's my main disclaimer here. And for those of us who are experiencing somebody who feels this way, we have to be able to remove our ego about it. It is not about us. It is not about what we did to them as adults. It is not about what we did to them as their peers. It is about how they see the world. And being able to find people to encourage you to be who you are is really important. And I think for all of us that are committed to helping, especially teenagers, get through the things that we may see as little, it's not little to them.
Right.
It's not. It is the most important thing in the world, and it should be. And so for us to be able to remove our emotion about it and give them practical ways to deal with what they're going through and practical ways to understand, like, I don't want to give it away either, but the end of the book is like Nif really embracing that she is here for a purpose. She is on this planet for a reason, and that purpose doesn't have anything to do with her like frenemy. It doesn't have anything to do with, it's fine. Like, we have to be able to exemplify what we want these kids to understand about themselves by just living our lives in a productive way. Anyway, I could like soapbox Jenna in the house about this all day long.
Well,
but yeah.
Well, Jenna, I thank you so much for your bravery and not only sharing your story, but taking the time to turn it into a book that will help other people. So thank you so much. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I'm so grateful. And, I love what you guys are doing. I love what you're doing, Brad. It's about us supporting these kids. You know, anything I can do to help, just let me know.
That was Jenna Edwards. For more information about Jenna or her book, Aggressive Optimism, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.